Hello all, welcome. Thanks for joining us for another LetPub webinar. If you've been to previous webinars, you probably recognize me. My name is Dr. Clark Holdsworth. I'm the Research Communications Manager at LetPub. I'm going to be introducing my guest today, Dr. Scott Ferguson. Before that, I just want to make sure that we're getting audio and video. So if you could just type into the chat a quick note if everything's okay on your end. See if we get a message. It looks like we're getting some feedback, so audio should be working. If you are still having trouble, it's probably on your end. You can go ahead and just exit out, rejoin. Usually that works to reset it. Otherwise, check your input output within the settings. A couple things. So Scott, you can come in whenever you want with audio and video. Before we even get started, I will cover a couple things. I probably have Scott muted and out of video.
Yeah, it says the host has stopped my stuff.
Give me 1 second. There we go.
There we go. Nice.
Little Zoom troubles. Okay, looks like we have audio and video for both of us. A couple things. So in case you're all in the middle of your workday, I know Scott's relatively early in his, all the way out in Hawaii on their time zone. It's quite late here for me. I'm sure we have people from all over the globe today, as we usually do. If you're trying to plan this for your day, we're looking at approximately 45 minutes to an hour. Scott and I are going to do our best to keep it within that. We're known for going a little bit longer, but we'll target that for today so you can plan your schedule. A couple little housekeeping things before we get started. So this webinar is going to be available on demand, as they always are. What's going to happen is you're going to get an email within 24 hours that just has to get the video processed for the recording, and it sends out an automated email to you from Zoom. Within that, we're going to have a link so that you can visit this webinar on demand in case you have to leave early today, or in case you're actually not here and you're seeing this when you get the recording. So just be on the lookout for that, but don't worry about sending us an email until then. It's automated. Every single person in here or registered will get that sent to you. The other item is we don't have slides today, actually, because we're going to be having a sort of fireside chat set up here, and it's going to be a discussion between Scott and I. The slides aren't going to be of particular interest to you anyway, so just go ahead and use the recording if you want to revisit any of these ideas or concepts. All right, that's all the housekeeping. Looks like we have a good number of participants, so I expect that we will have certain specific questions for Scott. I was telling Scott before we even got started, I suspect a lot of you are students or early faculty who are running into your own challenges early on in your career. So this is more of a targeted audience, and I expect some really, really good questions. We brought Scott in because he has so much recent experience in this. And so you can ask specific questions of him. Just keep in mind that we're going to be talking about Scott's experience specifically, right, which is in a particular field. And so there's going to be a variation in what you're going to experience. But I think some of the generalities, stuff that Scott has brought up to me previously, apply widely. So we'll try to explain it to you in that way so that it's helpful to everybody, regardless of what type of institution you're at, what field you're in, et cetera. All right, so I'm going to bring the PowerPoint back up for us, Scott, and let you introduce yourself.
Okay.
Is that looking good?
I actually don't see it.
Let's try again. There we are.
Yeah, there we go. That looks good.
All right, we had a little bit of trouble earlier with these slides showing. Again, as I said, we could probably do this even without the slides. We just want to add some talking points for us so that we can sort of frame this discussion. So if we do get a little interruption, just don't worry about it. We'll try to get you through without them. There we go. So The way we're going to cover this is these sort of 4 sections and then the Q&A at the end with you, so you can all give us specific questions that you need answered. But we're going to start off background and expectations. I want Scott to sort of outline what his situation is, where he's coming from, how he got to where he is today. That'll set you up for the type of things that he's going to be able to discuss and where he's coming from, the context of his experience. We'll then move into a section where we focus on establishing yourself at your institution. So the interactions that you have, not just with other faculty at the institution, but administrative people, anybody that's associated with setting up your lab, getting your research started. Then we'll go into establishing yourself in the field. So being in that first situation where you're a PI, that's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of things that get discussed, imposter syndrome, these types of things. So Scott will be able to address some of that from firsthand experience. And then the last section will sort of be on all these other things that comprise a faculty appointment, your teaching, your service component, and any other sort of challenges, which Scott will kind of highlight a lot of the interpersonal challenges, things that you have to do well to create a good environment for your research and to start your lab off strong. And then we'll get into the Q&A where you guys can enter your questions into the chat. As a reminder, we do have the chat feature. We also have the Q&A. So click on the Q&A if you want to leave a question for us to answer so it doesn't get lost in the chat. The chat's free for you all as attendees to just back and forth, whatever you want, that's fine. But leave any question you want us to address in the Q&A, and you can actually start doing that right now. You'll also notice in the Q&A, if there's a good question, if there's a question that is essentially the same as your own, go ahead and upvote it. What we run into a lot is we get upwards of like 100 questions, and I sort of have to prioritize. You don't want me prioritizing for you. You guys prioritize, just upvote what you think are the good questions and you want to see answered. So with that, Scott, I'm going to stop talking and let you introduce yourself, talk about some of that context.
Oh, no. So yeah, thanks Clark for having me on. Good afternoon, I guess. Yeah, different time zones for everybody here. So I'm excited to be here. My name's Dr. Scott Ferguson. I'm assistant professor at the University of Hawaii at the Hilo campus on the Big Island of Hawaii. So University of Hawaii has 10 campuses, so very spread out. I earned a PhD in physiology at Kansas State University along with Clark. Graduated in 2015. Studied cardiopulmonary function with an emphasis on skeletal muscle, oxygen delivery, and vascular control, and then went to the University of Colorado School of Medicine in Denver to do postdoctoral training. So I did just shy of 4 years of postdoctoral training. You see that photo in the middle of the presentation there. Got to participate in some really wonderful research. Most of my research is preclinical in the sense that I do a lot of animal models, but I also do some clinical work here. You can see in this particular experiment, I got to be the participant. So I have sort of a wide array of research expertise and experience using both clinical and preclinical models. So I finished my postdoctoral training a little over a year ago. We moved to Hawaii, July of 2019. And it's been sort of a bizarre first year as a faculty member. It's always like, it's intense transitioning out of the trainee mode and into the role as a PI. And then yeah, all of a sudden we've got COVID-19 that we've been dealing with around the world. But yeah, hopefully I can shed some light on some of the things that I've been through moving from a big institution to a small institution where we do a lot more teaching here, but also trying to fire up my research across the campuses that we have and trying to leverage those resources to be successful within your first year as a faculty member. But does that sort of summarize what you wanted me to cover there?
Absolutely. And that's what I was discussing. So as you mentioned, you have both experience with animal and human work. So your lab and the research that you want to be doing is sort of predicated on both. And that's an example of the circumstances that we can talk about as we get into some of these first questions on the next slide. So yeah, so your background is, the bottom line is sort of there's a lot for you in a startup. There's a lot for you as an early career faculty. And so some of the ways you dealt with those challenges will be interesting to hear about. All right, so the first one, again, like we said, there's just going to be some talking points on here for Scott and I to go through, and we want to focus first on sort of the research, the bottom line for really any scientist, getting yourself set up so that you can actually be comfortable in this new environment that you've moved to. I want to what I'm going to have you do first, Scott, is your thoughts and advice on startup. I'd actually like to have you brief people sort of, because there's probably regional differences too in what startup means. And so some people may be coming to the US for an appointment, something like that. And I just want to brief them on what a startup package is, how it's negotiated, and then get sort of your thoughts and advice on it.
So yeah, startup packages will certainly vary across institutions. They could give you, you know, what it is basically is money that you can use to start up, right? Start your lab, start your research, and sort of get the ball rolling with your area of expertise and getting extramural funding. Typically, the goal is to get you started so that you can compete for some extramural funding from other agencies in the U.S., like the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, things like that. Those are typically where the startup is aimed at getting you. And so, depending on the university you're at, you'll negotiate that. The kind of the administration will ask you what you need to get your job done and to start your lab during the interview process. And that all sort of factors into the offer that they give you for the initial job offer. So, you know, that number could vary anywhere between, you know, $3,000 to $300,000, depending on a lot of factors. So, you know, that's typically what you want to do is think to yourself, you know, what do I need? What pieces of equipment do I need to get my work done? Are those equipment at my institution already, or can I collaborate with somebody that has that equipment? And if not, you know, how much money am I going to need to buy that equipment and set that up and learn how to use it if I don't know how to use it already, and those types of things. So those are typically what's going through your mind when you're trying to figure out what type of startup money should I ask for. Have a list of equipment that you need, as well as facilities that you need access to, and make sure that that's feasible before you sign on the dotted line saying you accept the job. So, you know, that's pretty much summarizes what the startup is, Clark. Do you have anything to add there?
No, I do just want to point out, like, I'm glad you said, I thought you were going to start with a higher value for your
Yeah.
lower end estimate. I'm glad you started with such a low value, because we do, um, we have a ton of researchers for our user base, and that crosses into the humanities, you know, the whole spectrum, and funding is different across clinical, quote unquote, hard sciences, social sciences, this type of thing. And I think sometimes there's an idea of like, oh, well, that's only like a hard science thing and whatever, because you're talking about equipment, but your university or whatever institution you're at should always be supporting you. So even if it's humanities or something where it's a little bit less traditional, I think new faculty should always keep in mind that there's an expectation the university is there to support you. Whatever that number is, it's going to vary for, as you said, many, many reasons, but certainly not asking for anything or not seeking out some support when you get in is sort of you and the university setting you up for failure. So it's important. The very first thing you do when you come in is ask for them to help you get started so you can do what you promised or what you proposed to them in the interview. Yeah, so I think that's pretty good. We do have that previous talk we gave. I think some of you that are here may have seen that where Scott spoke about startup as well, and we can revisit that in the Q&A as well. I'd like to actually move along to this next point here, which is what are the general expectations? So like going in, you're probably not on tender track yet going in. You may or may not be. How do you set it up? So you already have your contract in place. How do you start maybe setting goals against these expectations that the department and the university have for you in the first year versus first 3 years, first 5 year, that type of thing? How did you go about planning that?
Yeah, so this is good stuff here because there's going to be like guidelines, right, for each university. For us, there's tenure and promotion guideline like handbook, and you can go in and you can see exactly what the university looks at and expects for each level of towards the tenure, right? So I'm an assistant professor now in the US system. We usually go to associate. And then when you make the transition to associate, you can either get tenure then, or you wait, you just get promoted without tenure and then go up for tenure later. And then the final stage would be full professor. And so there's time requirements, and then there's service requirements and research requirements. And again, all these will vary depending on your institution and what they focus most heavily on. At this institution, it's very heavily based on teaching, but research it also plays a prominent role, which is sort of where I've come from. I'm trying to establish my research lab so I can, continue that sort of directive, if you will. But the way to approach it is to understand that those expectations even before you take the job, and then once you do get into the new position, you want to outline some sort of goals, right? So the first thing I would do is try to find those guidelines for tenure and promotion, and see what is prioritized by the university and by the administration, what the committee is going to be looking at when they see your dossier, and make those decisions whether or not to give you either a contract renewal or promotion, and then outline what you need to do to check those boxes, right? So for me, it was, okay, I know I need to get some extramural funding because, the startup usually gets run out within a year or two. Then make sure that you use that up for fiscal reasons. And so you have to have something to carry on from there. So that was really my first thing. Start looking for internal grants, external grants, pilot grants, whatever you can go for, that you can submit to try to secure some extra funding to get your research going. That also shows productivity, maybe publish some data that you've had from your previous institution, but also trying to collect some initial data and build those collaborations to get you established and to sort of build this wheel, if you will, of abilities to get things going, and get you on track for tenure. So if you do that, then you start checking the boxes for promotion. And then, when it comes time to submit your dossier of what you've done after the first year and second year and third year, they'll see that you're on track and that you're being productive.
Excellent. Excellent. I do want to mention as a quick plug for us, LetPub does offer services for editorial oversight and review of these tenure and promotion dossiers, as you said. And you could have someone like Scott, who's an editor for us, sort of reviewing that for you, which is,
That's
I think, a
awesome.
best case scenario. So if you're looking for more direct assistance in that way. But yeah, so did you feel a bit on the clock starting? Like, oh my gosh, like I have to do
Yeah.
this by a year mark, by a 2-year mark?
Yeah, it's definitely different. I mean, you hear this, right? You hear like, oh, like the clock is ticking and all that. But when you're a trainee, you have like your postdoc. For me, a postdoc training, like you have 3 years of funding and then you have to find something else to keep that funding going. But here very much is in writing, because my letter of offer states that how the process works. You go up, so I'm going up for tenure, or not tenure, contract renewal right now already, as finishing my first year. So they renew my contract for another year, and then I'll go up for promotion, and you can also go for early tenure there. But again, you have to check all those boxes, so you have to have done stuff, and one of the things is your teaching expertise. So you have to generate teacher evaluations from the students and show that you're an effective teacher. But then also all the research, you need to be publishing quality work in journals, and the expectations are going to differ depending on where you're at. Some institutions will want you 2-3 publications a year. Some will want more than that. Some will require 2 or 3 publications for tenure. So, you really want to make sure you're on top of that, especially when you come in, because the clock is ticking, money runs out, you miss deadlines for grants. Most of you probably are familiar with grant cycles. For the NIH, there's usually 3 in a year. And if you miss them, you got to wait. And so, establishing some clear goals, some grants you want to pursue, and then going for that that would be my takeaway for getting started when you first arrive.
Excellent. So it sounds like, getting the list, but like it becomes very objective. There's something laid out, and objective measures are not always great.
Yeah.
Sometimes, particularly in publishing, we see that. But it's very much, there's a lot of subjective things you can do for yourself to improve, but it becomes this thing of there, at the end of the day, there's going to be a bottom line that they're going to evaluate you on, and all the other stuff you do. It's good, but you need to focus on the things that are in writing, as you put it, so that you can check those boxes, because that's what they're ultimately going to evaluate you on. And being on the clock, I think again, it's important to look at deadlines, because you're talking, so you're talking about what can I do in my first year? Well, a lot of deadlines are like a year cycle. You know what I mean? You're planning for something 9 months ahead. That's a big problem in science, is you have to plan so far ahead, for a lot of these different things, for submissions and grants and whatnot. So making sure you get a handle on those deadlines, and understanding that like you're the one that has to handle them now. It's not as though there's other people in a lab that you were in as a postdoc, or as a PhD student. Now it's, you're Scott Ferguson is the one finding out what deadlines he's concerned about, and making his selections rather than going along with what a lab is doing. And so if early faculty aren't on top of that like you've been, then I could see them, getting into a bit of trouble. This next one here, you mentioned teaching. We're going to talk plenty about teaching later, I think, because I think that's an important one. A lot of people are a bit nervous about how that teaching, particularly if they don't have experience, is going to be reflected in their early evaluations. Let's move on to this one. So strategy for integrating yourself with other faculty. This is the big catch-all, and I think such an important component. I think you agree with me as well. I put a couple examples here, like guest teaching, lab rotations, collaboration, this type of stuff. But whatever, pick one that you think is important, that you'd like to highlight, for how you came in and made yourself part of the faculty, made yourself feel like a colleague, among these people, as someone coming in as a first-time faculty off your postdoc.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's because what you're doing is you're being a part of a team, and ultimately, yeah, you want to be one of the leaders on that team to help drive the university as a whole forward and accomplish the teaching and research mission of the university, right? And that's like what the administration wants to see out of you at the end of the day, and that's why they give you tenure. So what I would say is, yeah, you need to be a team player, and that means a lot of different things depending on expert or the experience that you're going to have at your university. But when you're going for these grants and you're looking for opportunities, you also need to be looking out for your colleagues. So for me, I was hired with another young faculty as well at the same time, same level, assistant professor. So when I'm finding grants that he may be able to apply for, I'm sharing things with him. We're talking about how we can collaborate on projects and how we can submit for grants together. That's one way of sort of looking out for each other. If you have somebody in the department that has an expertise in an area that's, tangentially related to what you're doing, maybe have them read your paper and provide some feedback, include them as a co-author on the paper. It's that helps so much in terms of helping them out, so that
Mm-hmm.
they're publishing with you and they're getting another paper out the door. But it really shows that, yeah, now you're part of the team. And when you start applying for grants, it shows how integrated you are already. And when grant reviewers see that there's institutional support in terms of this guy's already been working with other colleagues there, established PIs at the university, that's the type of stuff you want to have.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll challenge you to do that, help each other out.
Excellent. That's brilliant, because it touches on a point, I think. So would you say that that was helpful, identifying someone who's at a similar career stage, to you, and sort of maybe not being like, not as though you have to become collaborative colleagues, because your work might not be too tightly related, but the idea of sort of sharing that early experience with them, helping each other out, like you said, looking out for each other, and also because it presents, it's a bit of shared success. So if you're both doing well, sort of together on the same path, then the department looks and says, oh yeah, like because they look at their levels, right? A department is thinking about their most senior faculty, their tenured faculty, and their leadership roles and everything, and all the way down to their more junior faculty who are coming in, they want to succeed. It's kind of like a roster for a sports team, if you will, a
Mhm.
sort of lineup. And so seeing success among people in the junior faculty position, it's almost, do you feel like it's shared success among you and provides benefit to both of you?
Yeah, it's a team. You have to look at it like a team too. And it extends out of your department too. So, one of the first things I did, was look at what was going on at the medical school on an entirely different island, different campus, right? And look at some of those faculty and try to think of ways that our campus could work with their faculty as well. And then you bring that to your department and say, hey, I'm trying to do this, and they can do this too. And then, yeah, that opens up the doors for a lot more things rather than just like getting into your office and going to work for yourself. Like, you really got to think of it in terms of how are you going to lead the department and how are you going to lead the personnel and ultimately your students too.
Yeah, because that also, I think, comes back when a department head or a dean of a college is looking across the faculty landscape, and there's always going to be feast or famine a bit, right? There's going to be lean years or plenty for different faculty. Someone might not get a grant renewed, someone else gets a new grant, this type of thing. And when you're showing that when your success is evaluated on the department level, there's more latitude for you to have a bad time or someone else to have a bad time, and it to not be reflected only on you, because it's like, well, we're doing good as a department. That's just the random variability that's occurring. But if you're only for yourself, if you're not making this effort to align with colleagues, particularly at the same career stage as you, then you don't really you won't get viewed favorably in that way, right? So
Exactly.
excellent. If you don't have anything on that, let's go to this last one to wrap up this section talking about integrating with the institution. Um, this is something that you can give a little bit of insight on. It's going to be specific to your field again, but so you can see some of the examples I put here. Who's the people that you met with or that were super important to you getting established in this first year, particularly as established as a PI for the first time? Who were the people that you wouldn't have expected, or you don't think some of our attendees here would expect, that are important people that they need to talk to or important resources that they need to know about?
This is critical. I mean, this is absolutely, especially at like a smaller institution like where I'm at. The Hilo campus itself is smaller, so it's a very tight knit group of people. And when you first arrive, yeah, let's submit grants, let's get research done. But there's all this regulation stuff that has to fall into place to even start that. I'm talking DEA licenses to get the drugs you need to do your experiments. Like, I just had to apply and just received a license, a DEA controlled substance license, stuff that you didn't have to do as a trainee because the PI you worked under had that stuff in place already. They're already doing occupational health and safety inspections and things like that. These are the people you want to reach out to and establish sort of what you need to do to get your job done. So grants offices would probably be the first place I would start. If you're going to be submitting grants, which you really should, just throw that stuff out the door. See if you can get some funding, and then you can cover your bases on the other items while that's in review. But to submit grants, it's got to get routed and do all this, this procedure for major grants. There's people that need to help you do that. They're going to help you set up your budget and do those types of things. Uh, find out find out who those people are, which it may not be clear. Some institutions are great because they'll have like a website with all the names, all the people, and you contact this person and they work through it. But smaller institutions, you might have to hunt for it a little bit. I had to hunt for it a little bit to figure out the right people and then to go. I went physically met with them. This was last fall, right before the COVID-19. But I sat down with them and just kind of, figured out, okay, like what are they used to doing to submit a grant? Because what they're used to doing is probably a lot different than when I was at the big medical school in Colorado. So you want to understand sort of what their expectations are come submission time. So you're not sending them things and they're asking, well, where's all this other stuff that I don't usually do?
Mhm. Or
So,
timelines? Do you
yeah,
find timelines might vary between
yeah,
where you are
timelines will
now and being
vary
at CU?
for sure. Yeah, timelines will vary in the sense that, you know, just they're expecting to not do some things. I think that the PI will do some things that at another, it's like
Okay.
CU you would not be responsible
Okay.
for.
So clarifying those responsibilities
Yeah,
is
exactly.
super important. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
The things like occupational health and safety, like I told you, like you're going to need to keep a binder for your lab inspections, the stuff like the DEA license, figuring out those people, asking them what you need to pass the inspection and make sure you're on the same page. Um, yeah, those are probably the first places I would start.
So don't make assumptions, I think is probably a
Yeah,
big thing. You got to go and like double check all this stuff because you may have only been at one or two previous institutions, a PhD, a postdoc, maybe a second postdoc, but still, that's a very tiny sample size, and you can expect wherever you're going to again have different expectations. And then you go to put a grant in, and they're like, "Oh, I thought you would do all of these things," right?
right.
Or something like that.
Yep.
And you don't want to run into that. So don't make any assumptions. Everything you took for granted the previous place you were, check it all out, right? And
Make sure
make
you
sure it's
got it
correct.
here. Yeah, the new
Okay,
place.
perfect. Any final comments on this? We'll talk about some teaching stuff I definitely want to get into, and we're going to move on now to establishing yourself sort of in your field. But is there any key institutional tips you have before we go on to those? And we can address them in the Q&A as well.
Not really. I mean, IRB is big too. IRB or IACOOK. That's going to take some time, but all of this stuff can be remedied from reaching out to people and establishing relationships with people. So that will probably be the bottom line. Establish relationships with new people across the university. I know that's very broad, but it's intended to be so because
Mhm.
that will open your doors and help you out.
Okay, perfect. Okay, moving on to the next one then. So establishing yourself in your field, and again, there's a lot of overlap in these. I kind of wanted to put it into these little segments because I feel like as an investigator, this is kind of what you're thinking about. Like, okay, I'm going to a new institution, that's the big thing, but also I'm going to be a PI in my field or whatnot. So now we're thinking a bit about that in terms of you've talked about it a little, but let's start with getting published, right? So that's a big concern. You came out of somewhere. And maybe you could talk a little bit about this, like having leftover papers, right, from a previous
Mhm.
location and getting them in and using that, but realizing they're going to run out whatever data you're sitting on. How
Yeah.
did you start to work through those timelines and those cycles to make it so you didn't have a gap and you did have, what you wanted after a year?
Yeah. So this is good. Ideally, right? You like collect a bunch of data and you have some stuff left over from your postdoc or wherever you're at before, and then that allows you to have something to write on when you get to your new institution. So that's how it worked for me. I had a project that I'd collected data on for a couple of years, and finally, pretty much, it got to the point where I could write it up. And so as soon as I got here, put in for some smaller grants, but also, yeah, working on this manuscript to get it out. Um, what you just want to be clear about is with your institutions, or for me, it was with my postdoc mentor at CU at the University of Colorado, just how authorship goes in terms of where you put the institution, and then also understanding what your institution will allow you to count towards your research service. For us, is no factor as long as you put like University of Hawaii Hilo on there. You can put other stuff on there too. So for me, I had both institutions on the um, title page there. So it counts towards my tenure and promotion, but it also gives credit to where the data was collected as well, back at CU. So yeah, bringing that data with you will help a ton. Also this brings it back to what we were talking about earlier. There may be PIs at the institution that have data that they could use your help with, that they've been sitting on for a while. So maybe through you reaching out and talking to people like I've emphasized in the past, now you figured out, oh yeah, they have a project, you could offer to help them write that data up, and then yeah, you
Yep.
get your name on the paper, and they get their name on the paper, and everything's good.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is probably the most important thing to
That can
look
also,
at
I
in the
suppose,
beginning.
be part of with the setup of your lab in terms of prioritizing what sort of, again, we're thinking a lot like experimentalists, but this doesn't necessarily just have to apply to this, but as you get going, what you have prepared to work on, in our case, setting up equipment, getting equipment, setting it up, and being able to get certain data. If you know someone, if you talked about collaboration with someone, right during your interview and during the hiring process, you talked about collaboration. It might be that just getting your measurements set up for the collaboration should be your first priority, because even if you have trouble, right, getting your overall lab and this whole publishing machinery going, this whole data collection machinery, if you get set up to collaborate with someone, it's a little bit of an easier entry, particularly for those first 6 months. You can, like you said, you can get a name on a paper, you can get some good work out there using someone that's already set up, and that way you don't have to go from 0 to 100 and
Yeah.
have the perfect lab set up and be able to do all of your experiments that are required for you to get your own paper published. But some of that collaboration you may have discussed during the hiring process, you can get that started a bit easier. Again, I can't even imagine how difficult it is to go within a year getting an entire lab set up for data collection and into your publishing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, for
um,
sure.
okay, so obviously we have to talk about grants. We can never go too far without discussing grants. So sort of two-pronged. And I know this is a thing that may have been pertinent for you. I don't quite recall, but bringing in awarded grants to your new institutions, things to look out with that, or the process of how it works in the US, and then writing grants during your first year. Again, the same strategy. Do you look for collaboration? What's the best way to improve your percentages in terms of being successful with grants in that first year?
Yeah, bringing money with you is good, always awesome. If you can do it, obviously, depending on the grant mechanism, there's going to be some limitations on that. There's some the grants that I could apply for that this university is specifically eligible for because of the student population that it serves. And so if I was awarded that grant, I could not bring it to University of Colorado, for example. That's an ineligible institution. So, those are things you want to check into, obviously, during the hiring process. If you're just awarded a grant, make sure you can transfer it. Ideally, that's what you want. Um, so if you could do that, that helps. That sets you up, and all the administration obviously likes that too because that gives you, depending on the grant, up to 5 years where they don't really have to worry about you being productive in that sense, bringing in another grant, and it just helps a ton. So now maybe if you have your startup, you would also have your grant. It's 5 years where you've got more runway, right? If you're like talking about an airplane trying to take off, you want a long runway. That's like what you want. So yeah, bringing a grant with you is ideal. Um, Obviously, that's not always possible. For me, I couldn't really bring it. I kind of have an odd scenario. I applied for the NIH's K99 R00 grant, which is a 5-year grant. The first 2 years are mentored as a postdoc. I applied for it the last year of my postdoc, not realizing I'd get this job, and then also applied for this job at the same time. Was scored, and then it was scored at 38. For the lower the score, the better. We didn't really think that would get funded, but so I took the job here, came here, and then realized after I got here that the thing actually got funded. But because I was no longer a postdoc or a trainee, I was unable to bring the grant with me. So I had to decline the award. So it's really too bad. But what that does set you up for is writing grants right away. So I was able to recapitulate that proposal and turn it into some smaller grants, a couple different smaller grants that I put in for, with the aim of building collaborations with the med school, which is on an entirely different island, and hopefully, getting things around to submit for another big grant like that. So those are the types of things you want to really make sure you take into account when you're getting things going in that first year.
So again, talking to the people, particularly
Yeah.
again, if you're coming from, again, like you and I have had colleagues, Europe, South America, our colleague from Brazil, knowing how, what you're going to have to do, particularly if you're moving across country, or for you, for example, so such a large transition, going and talking to a person that knows and getting an answer on something specific like awards like that, eligibility, super crucial. Don't hem and haw over the answer. Go get it from a person that knows and can give you the final answer so that you don't mess something up. Yeah, be a huge concern. To save a little time here, I want to get into the one I'm really concerned about, which is, again, this may not apply to everybody, but for a lot of people, you're going to be working with students. Even if you don't have a big lab, even if you're doing theoretical work or in the humanities, you're certainly going to have students. There's different concerns for a lab, but you're going to have students that you're going to be mentoring. They probably expect it. It's probably something you had to sell the department on during your interview and the hiring process. So what's your advice there? Getting your first students, graduate, undergraduate, whatever, and then pros and cons of picking up students early on within that first year. And what do the relationships look like when you maybe don't have the lab set up, right? Do you approach it differently and then look to transition to like a full mentorship role a little bit later on? What was your approach to that?
Yeah, I waited to pick up students mostly because I didn't have a lab set up. So this goes to a little bit more into a specific scenario for me. But as I mentioned in the beginning, I do a lot of preclinical work, and there's no animal facilities on my island. So I had to establish those relationships at the medical school on Oahu, which is where the city of Honolulu is, because they have the facilities there. And so at the time, I really didn't have any work really. I mean, I was doing, I was telling you earlier, I was writing papers and I was getting grants out the door. I didn't really have work for a student. We also don't have a graduate program in our department right here. So I'm working with College of Pharmacy here and a few other departments that also have graduate programs, and I'm starting to get student interest now. But for me, it worked out well to start teaching and sort of build those relationships with the students, share your expertise through your teaching, and sort of bring in your research into your teaching to help you become a more efficient and more effective teacher in your field. That gets the students excited about your research, and then you get the right ones asking you to come into the lab, and to get involved in your research. And that's how it worked out for me. I had a student that's post-bac, actually. He had taken one of our classes and reached out to me and was trying to get into medical school, and understood that, yeah, I'm teaching cardiopulmonary physiology and doing some cutting edge research in that field. And so he reached out to me, and yeah, he's been a great asset for the team, starting to write publications as a post-bac student, trying to get into med school. So, that's how I approach it. I didn't rush into it. I was offered to have some funding for students specifically, but I didn't want to just do it for the sake of doing it. I wanted to save that funding for somebody else that already had work going, and just not really burn that card right away. Wait till I needed the help.
It sounds like it sort of highlights the importance again. If you're concerned about teaching or something, that's okay and understandable. A lot of people don't come into their first position in teaching, but this again emphasizes how important it is, because teaching is going to be a potential avenue for you to get high quality students that are going to help you build that team and create a good atmosphere. So again, it's okay to be a bit apprehensive about the teaching coming in for people transitioning, but it's super important, and you get over it and get it done, because this is another area where it sort of highlights how important that teaching is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move into this last one here. We'll pick one or two, and then we'll go into questions. If we don't have any questions right away in there, we can come back to some of these, and I can ask you some. But this goes into teaching service, basically like the everything else of it, besides those two major points that I think are at the forefront of everybody's mind. So let's talk right about the teaching now. So either starting for a lot of people or improving your teaching career. Developing courses, what's the expectation for people, and for people that again are going to be apprehensive about it, because this is a theme I hear all the time, what would you say to them in terms of advice or really just encouragement, that they can succeed in this thing that maybe they didn't get exposed to enough during their previous training experience?
Yeah, don't be afraid of it. It is intimidating. you know, both Clark and I taught as graduate students, as a graduate teaching position. Not everybody gets to do that or wants to do that. Um, there's lots of resources out there, especially now with COVID-19 changing the dynamic and uh, how we teach and how we deliver education to students. Um, we've had to shift a lot of the teaching strategy to an online format where, we're doing a lot of what we're doing right now, this type of format. So I would encourage you to look out for some of that stuff. Our institution's done a great job of making those resources available and like telling us, like, lots of emails, like, hey, like, this digital summer camp is going on to where you can learn how to use Zoom the best way for your teaching. So logistically, that really helps out. Content wise, I mean, yeah, you really need to just be able to deliver, the content for the course as best as you can. Obviously, if it's in your wheelhouse, that's what you want. So when you're picking classes to teach, or you're trying to figure out that scenario, even in the hiring process, like, get a vibe for what they're going to want you to teach. Hopefully that's within your wheelhouse, and you can have that coming in when you start the semester. Then you kind of know. Also, it's best out of the gate if you have a reduced teaching load. For me, I had usually my full-time teaching load is three credit hour courses a semester. I started off with two, and then the second semester last spring, I secured a course release to work on research, and then I also have another one this semester, same deal. My small grant helps pay for that release. So while I do have my teaching, it's the time commitment isn't quite as big because it will, once you first start teaching your classes, if you're not used to teaching them off the start, it's going to take a lot of your time just to prep to do it well,
Mhm.
to make sure things flow correctly.
Yeah. And as a reminder, to get back to a point that you emphasized early on, is the idea of team. It comes back to it again. Again, the faculty is evaluated as a team. Faculty know how other faculty are teaching, and they have an expectation of you. And you don't you don't want to be teaching in a totally deficient way compared to them and sort of be that wink link. So it's always good to see what they're doing with their teaching and get an idea what the department philosophy is. Really, from you can get it from everybody in general, but you can also get it from the department head more directly, because they might have like expectations that you don't know to align with unless you go sort of seek it out and see how they're teaching, what their approach is. Because it's not just random. It's not just a bunch of classes, right? Departments really put a lot of effort into curating an experience, and so making sure you're not afraid. Again, there's this idea of if you are transitioning it, this is like sort of the start, the early part of your teaching career. That hesitancy will do double damage to you because you're not as prepared anyway, and now you're hesitant to go get help. That can be really, really tough and just totally overload you. So make sure you keep in mind it's a team thing and try to align with what others are doing, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, be a team player, right? So one of our faculty or our department chair just went on sabbatical this year and asked if I could take one of her public health courses. I looked at the curriculum to see if it was even possible, and it is. It's I looked at it stuff that Clark and I had covered in graduate school. I'm familiar with basic stuff, undergraduate class. So yeah, I'm helping out. So anytime you could do that without, you've got to balance it, right? A lot of times, a good way to say it is, I'll do it this semester, but after that, we'll have to talk about it again. Clark, that was one thing that David Poole, our doctoral mentor, told me early on was, be willing to help, but don't overextend yourself either, because you got to protect your time. You really do. That's one thing that's become very evident as a new faculty member for me.
And so for you, this probably came a little bit easy just because I know you're pretty comfortable with like leadership role, collaboration, getting people on board together. You have more of a natural affinity that not everybody has. How do you approach the service requirements, and how do you sort of what advice would you give to people that maybe aren't as proficient in that in terms of taking charge and being a person that's looked to for responsibility and accountability in the department, particularly when you're such a junior faculty member? For you, it might not be as tough, but what do you do that you think could help others in that regard?
do your job. Bottom line, I'm not kidding. I spend a decent amount of time reading some literature on leadership. For those interested in reading a little bit more, a guy named Jocko Willink. He's a former U.S. Navy SEAL. He runs a podcast and writes really great books on leadership. But I think he revisits other texts throughout history on leadership, going way back to Greek mythology even. And one of the most difficult things a leader has to do is get his folks to do their job. So if you come in as a young faculty member and you get your job done, what is your job? Well, we just talked about it, right? It's getting comfortable with the faculty that you're working around, offering to help, establishing yourself in your lab, right? So establishing productivity and teaching your students well, and then maybe serving on a committee or two to give you your university service. So if you come in and you do those things and you come to work every day and you work towards those goals every day, that's going to get you going real fast. That will, if you start accomplishing things, that in and of itself will establish yourself as a leader and a dependable person, which is what you're looking to do anyway, right? Your first thing should be establishing yourself as a dependable person in the department.
Yeah. And so, like you said, doing your job, like when you are getting placed on some of these committees or whatnot, you're given sort of assignments within the department. You have your meetings, and they need people for certain things. Take it seriously. Be thorough about it. Don't just be like, oh yeah, okay. Don't be the weak link in the group project type situation like that. Just like you knew from your time as a student and what you see with your students. It's that type of situation. Some people take it seriously, some don't. People put in variable degrees of effort. So just make sure you do a solid job consistent with, the service requirements in that contract that you're getting paid for. So
Exactly.
excellent. I'm actually going to synthesize these last two. I let us work through these slowly because we don't have a ton of questions yet, but I'll synthesize these last two to wrap up, and then we can open it up to general questions. But these last ones, lifestyle, work-life balance, this is important also too for our attendees, and I think it's something you can relate to. It's such a huge transition for you to go out to Hawaii like that. That's just huge. It's just a whole slew of different things in a totally different environment that's not the same as going from the East Coast to the West Coast or anything like that. And people coming from another country, maybe to an appointment in the US, that's huge. So how do you deal with the lifestyle change? You balance this work-life stuff and just not get overwhelmed with all this stuff that you and I have just talked about through these slides.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough for me. It was nice in the sense that Hawaii kind of has a more laid back approach than I think other parts of the world might in terms of work life balance. So coming from like a major medical research university like CU to a smaller campus like University of Hawaii Hilo, it was a pretty easy transition in that sense. The thing I would say is, remember you got a family, home, and if you don't, there's lots of other things out there that can enrich your lives, and also they kind of in turn enrich what you do. For me, I'm finding hobbies and things that I'm into, but they end up being related to what I do for a living anyway. So, don't shy away from taking opportunities like that. Obviously, again, the virus sort of slowed things down, but I got involved with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym here. You're going to meet people that way, just getting out, meeting people, getting yourself established in other parts of the community will help a lot. I do things with like the Division of Land and Natural Resources here because I like to go hunting and fishing. And so giving back to the wildlife biologists and things like that has introduced me to tons of people that I would have never met otherwise. And that just really helps smooth things out when you think about work, and it just allows you to be involved in other things. And all of that comes back to making you look good also on your tenure and promotion, because service to the community is huge, and that's what they, especially at this institution, they really want to see you doing is bringing back your really helping your community out as well as the students at the university.
Yeah.
So yeah, just get out there. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, culture is a really big topic now, not just culture, U.S. culture, Chinese culture,
Yeah.
South American culture. It's also about culture at the university. They have this sort of thing, and they want buy-in. Everybody wants buy-in, and so you need to sort of participate in that. And doing that and balancing your work life, I think it can relieve if you are going to a new faculty position, it's been a challenge for you. We had someone share in the chat that it's been tough. They wish they could have heard this talk, earlier on. If it's a challenge for you, embrace the other stuff besides the work, because that will ease some of these feelings that people get with the imposter syndrome, with feeling like this transition to being a PI or this transition to a new place is a bit overwhelming. Trying to improve yourself as a scientist while also like flipping your life on its head a little bit can be a challenge. And if you for you, this has always been easy for you, I think, but for embracing culture, both the local area and the university, and really just buying into it, I think is a great attribute to have. I think it can really alleviate some of the stress and certainly burnout. Burnout is real. Like, trust us, even if you're doing well in your postdoc or wherever you are now, burnout is real. You cannot just be this hyper focused, I'm going to get the work done. It won't last. And the way you burn out could be damaging to the rest of your career, because it could result in maybe some animosity within the place you're at. And then where do you go from there? Like, you can't go from your first faculty position not really working out. It's going to be very hard to transition. So don't let yourself get burned out, because that'll affect your career worse than just struggling a little, not being as productive as you want. That's probably not going to, put you down for your career, but letting yourself get burned out, it's a disservice to you and a disservice, to the university.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say, like, it's going to be hard. The imposter syndrome is real. It's just hard, and it's hard for everybody. I didn't get that K99. I put in all 4 years worth of effort. I mean, if you want to include the work I did as a PhD student, it's even more than that. It was all into one project. Came so close to getting that, and then like, oh yeah, you can't have it. Sorry, you were awarded it, but you can't have it.
Yeah.
That's I went down the path with that where it's like, man, I shouldn't have made the move. I shouldn't have done this. Shouldn't have done that. And you just can't do that. You've just got to put your head down and keep going. And things will happen. Good things will happen if you keep after it. So
Excellent.
don't let it get you down.
Okay. And with that, we have a couple questions now, so feel free again to put in more. We're approaching right at the hour mark now, but these questions we should be able to answer relatively directly and be pretty brief and get everybody's cleared up. So, one thing that there's a first real comment here that I want you to maybe just give your sort of quick take on. As a junior PI, I think mentorship in a real practical sense is crucial, meaning like actually having someone as a mentor, another faculty member, especially for someone who moves to a different country or, like you, an entirely different environment. Um, to what extent do you agree with that, or when would you encourage people maybe to look for that sort of official, practical sort of mentorship from another faculty member?
It's big, and I found that here for sure, and I totally agree with you. It is a big deal. Um, for me, it all comes back to just like reaching out to people. It's bizarre. Like, so many things in my life, like even this job, stemmed from me reaching out to somebody and being like, "Hey, like I do this. I do this type of work. Do you like that kind of work? Like, what would you see that sort of working and fitting?" And the same thing is true for me, sort of establishing a mentor role here. I just finished, the whole saga with the K99s, almost $1 million grant, and I couldn't have it. I was like, God, there's got to be a way that I can figure out how to do preclinical work here. And that way I wouldn't have to do all clinical work, which, is a long story. I'd have to get all that sorted out. But so I just started looking into folks at the medical school and saw that this PI there, he's an established full professor, did work in beta thalassemia mice, a mouse model of beta thalassemia, which is a blood disease. I study sickle cell disease, which is what the K99 is all based around. But I just emailed him, was like, hey, I do this. do you like to do that stuff? And basically like establish the relationship. He called me, we chatted on the phone. Like turns out we had like quite a bit in common. And then yeah, they ended up flying me over to Oahu to lecture to the department, and that established that sort of mentorship
Okay.
role. I've since then put in for a grant with him as a mentor on there because he's established. He's the head of the cardiovascular research group over there.
Okay.
But reach out again, reach out, look at the work that they're doing, right?
So,
Find
so
their
you use that.
expertise.
Okay. I see. So you actually used like research, shared research interest and sort
Yeah.
of collaboration. Um, and then naturally that led you to someone who's a more senior faculty and it made for a natural sort of mentor relationship there.
Yeah, if they're productive in the research and they've made it to full professor,
Mhm.
there's a reason, right?
What would you tell someone if like you didn't have that opportunity? What would you do if someone really came in and needed mentorship and wasn't able to have a serendipitous sort of occurrence like that, and they wanted help like from like who would you go to if you're like maybe looking to get set up in a more less of like a social way? Is there a more direct way if you are a faculty that's real concerned about it early on?
Yeah, there's resources at the university, like UH Hilo has one where they set you up with like
Okay.
it's you put in some it's kind of like a dating service, you
Hmm.
put in like
Matching.
what you do,
Right.
what you're into, yeah, and they match you up with somebody, and then you go meet them. Another thing you could do is just talk to your department chair,
Yeah.
just be open and honest with your department chair, and see see what they say because they've been around the block, they know how things work.
Yeah. Again, particularly if you have something specific like teaching and you're looking
Exactly.
for mentor
Yep.
relationship there, but something specific like that, like you go reach out, tell people like I need some help, and like they'll be like, oh, this would be a great person, and or someone will say, I want to help you with that. That's excellent.
For sure.
Okay. Another one here that we have. So this goes back to like your idea of like how you start up your lab and the students that we talked about. So maybe you could talk about what you're planning to do, but like what approach do you adopt as a junior faculty at the early stage, going from like think of it as a spectrum from fully account for students to do their research and review draft the papers, like so sort of like the situation you and I were in at the lab where the students
Yeah.
are really in control because it's a very established lab. You have very senior doctoral students and maybe postdocs in the lab, and really they're able to run the lab with you. um, or are you going to be sort of in charge of your work and a student's kind of there to like help out a little bit and stuff, but they're not really um, able to, you don't have a large enough cohort or experienced enough people to actually run it for you. How do you take that from day zero to let's say 3 years out? How would you progress that?
Yeah, that's good. I was actually just thinking about this the other day because you have to like start with what you got, right? So you don't have, especially here, we don't have a graduate program. So I'm lucky to have a post-bac student that wants to work with me in terms of expertise and capabilities. So you have to start with what you have in that sense. So I have undergraduates, get the ball rolling with that, and then once you establish the need for either a graduate program in your department specifically, or your ability to mentor students from another department like biology, like the College of Pharmacy, things like that are on campus here, then you can start to leverage that as a means to get graduate students that will be a little bit more capable in the sense of writing and publications and data collection. So to get there, yeah, you start again with the students you have. You are in charge of the lab work. So for me, I'm flying over to Oahu to get my studies done in rats. I will be doing everything from cannulating the arteries and collecting the data to analyzing the data to writing the manuscript. But that doesn't mean I'll do it all by myself. There will be lots of hands-on work for the students, as well as I'll teach them how to analyze the data. We'll work through the data together with oversight. You make sure it gets done correctly. But then, yeah, I mean, depending on this is something you kind of have to feel out what their capabilities are, but let them have a go at writing the intro. I mean, that's Clark, how you and I started. They say like, okay, like write the intro, see what happens for the paper. And then if you gotta rewrite it, you gotta rewrite it. But
Yeah.
a lot of times, you can you can work with what they have, and that helps you out, saves you
Yeah.
time, and they wrote the intro, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I'm going to approach it, I think.
Yeah, because there can be, I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety, right? Like when for you and I with very established PIs, like it's fine. Like if a paper, like their voice is already established, they're not worried about someone else writing a paper with their name on it. But you're concerned, like you don't have your grants, you want to get your grants, like you're trying to become this faculty member in the upper echelon, and so there's this hesitancy. But like you said, you can always let them do something. You just take what they give you. So if you get a good student, it's great and you can use them, right? Particularly if they have more experience, or if you get a postdoc in, that's a clear sign of like, okay, this person knows what they're doing. They can, like, I trust them to write papers. And then you can provide whatever level of oversight you need to be confident about the paper coming out of your lab, that it's like just perfect, and that way you can satisfy your anxiety sort of as a
Yeah.
new PI. Whereas maybe later in your career, you'd be a bit more hands off with it because you know your lab's reputation's established, but you can be careful about it without just doing it yourself and like never actually getting a student who's like taking on any sort of responsibilities. You can push past that early anxiety, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it
Okay.
helps everybody, it helps the students out and helps you out.
All
And
right.
the
So
department.
couple more here. Um, A quick question about, so the process of continuing previous research topics versus like doing something now and then aligning your work with new faculty. Any experiences you want to point out with like your carryover research that you were finishing up, and then aligning with maybe potential collaborations? You talked about it a bit, but just if you have any real pertinent examples.
Yeah, I mean, you just want to make sure that you're doing things different than what your, maybe your postdoc mentor was. That's one. We got a reviewer comment about that on this last grant I put in. I got the thing funded, which was excellent, but that was like the only thing. Like, be careful. Like, make sure if you're going to have collaborators from your postdoc institution that you're making it very clear that your work is different in that sense. I lucked out because I was doing exercise research and my other group wasn't, but that just look out for that stuff. Make sure it's clear. That would be the only thing I would say.
Excellent. Yes. And all the other things you said applied about the collaboration, just
Right.
going out, finding people that are aligned. Even again, don't think about just your department. So like
Right.
if you think about just your department, then you're like, oh, well, nothing like works out
Yeah.
like perfectly. Well, it's a small sample. Like
Well,
think
there's only three
more
people, and
broadly. Yeah,
there
yeah.
there are four for us, I guess, in our department total,
Mhm.
other than myself. So it's a small department. That wouldn't work
Yeah.
very
So
well.
alignment is easier with a larger sample size. So if you're having trouble aligning with ongoing research by other faculty, as this question is asking, think bigger. Give yourself more options. Okay. Um, a little bit of talk here. I'm not sure the exact context of this. It's asking about how can we motivate students and keep them going without losing hope. I'm not sure if this is COVID related, maybe. You could clarify if you want to send a follow-up question, but just in general, maybe you can talk a bit about motivating students, getting them excited about the work, and maybe you can touch on getting them excited about the work during COVID time and uncertainty of whether they're going to be, in class.
Yeah, we're lucky because we work in the healthcare field, because you can use this stuff to motivate.
It's a
Uh,
topic.
it's
It's a popular
exactly. I
topic.
mean, it's like I'm literally writing a response to COVID-19 and its impact on skeletal muscle and myopathies right now. That's the type of stuff you can like talk to your students about, and they're like, they see a global problem, and they're like, oh, like you could like do stuff to help with that, and so yeah, the thing to emphasize is they're not just going to school just to because they're supposed to. They're supposed to have like a tangible outcome from school. And I think that's a lot of problems with, people in our age group, Clark, they went to college. A lot of people just go to college because that's what they're supposed to do.
Mhm.
And for them, like that classical education model doesn't work out great for them. You need to go into it with the understanding that what you take away from that is tangible, and that you can apply. And there's a lot of intangibles in the university sense for sure, but that's the type of stuff I emphasize to my students. And when it's like a day that they're in person and they're not motivated to learn, you have to bring that stuff up. Be able to have real world scenarios. For me teaching physiology, it's pretty cool because I can just pull up any case study on heart failure, whatever you want to talk about, depending on what topic we're into. And you talk about real world stuff and then how this stuff applies. I think that's what's nice thing about our field. You just have to find a way to do that with whatever your field is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it doesn't just have to be COVID in the healthcare field, right? So
Right.
you use that as an example, and it's why we're fortunate right now. But yeah, again, there's always a lot of stuff, and you can just get them excited about. They're at a university studying science or whatever it is, right? And so you can always get them, even if they haven't found something they love. Again, this idea of like, okay, well, I'm part of this community, right? Like I'm focused on science, like I'm getting some scientific training. Like I don't know where I'm at yet, and yeah, it's just like my bachelor's early period right now, but I'm getting ingrained into this community and getting some skills, and you can see all the stuff going around. Like tech is big, healthcare is big. Every field has something going on, so latch onto that thing in your field and sort of go with it.
Yeah.
Can get them motivated. Okay, let's do a couple more. This is one let's do this one first that has several upvotes, and I'll get to this next one that's of real interest to me. So any other suggestions on starting a new lab in a department? So like, I'm not sure exactly what they want, what our attendee wants for the specifics of this question, but maybe you could raise biggest challenge of starting a new lab. What's something that really stands out to you in your experience that was like, oh man, like this is like a hurdle to get over, or this could be the thing that like really holds me back in this first year. Anything that stands out to you as a big challenge that you had?
Yeah. Money. Money's always big.
That's the easy answer.
Yeah. Money's typically going to be a limiting factor, depending on where you go. I mean, I had a colleague that just went to, I think it was Maryland, University of Maryland School of Medicine, and he had like a $3 million startup. I got $15,000, which just isn't really going to buy you much. So money is a limiting factor, which then comes all the way back around when we talk about grants. You don't have to get an R01 right off the bat. Say a big research grant. There's opportunities both intramural within the university and then small foundation grants around. Like there's Hawaii foundation grants here that are $50,000. And these are the things you want to apply for that. So yeah, getting in right off the bat and starting to tackle that is important. And then space, right? So space is always comes at a premium at the university. Space availability will, in my limited expertise as being young faculty, but space seems to come in context with how the university as a whole views what your department does. So what you need to do is be an advocate for your department and the mission of your department, and that means participating in seminars to talk about your work. So one of the things that kinesiology or exercise science departments have to overcome a lot of times is, we're not just training physical education teachers. We do a lot more than that. Like for example, cardiopulmonary medicine to get people to go to med school, teach for a couple of years in medical school. So what I do is, I've been going around volunteering for lectures, going to talk to school pharmacy and establishing those relationships again, which can do other things. That is an advocate for your department. They start to see, oh yeah, this guy's bringing in money because he's getting grants, and that helps. When you start writing grants, like, hey, I'm going to need space for this.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to help you with that. So that's probably the most difficult. Other than that is like technical, right? Is finding the people to help you run the experiments. And again, once you have the money, you can even fly some colleagues that you had in the past over. Particularly here, everyone wants to come to
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Yeah. So if it's a new lab, your primary concerns are space and money, and representation goes a long way in that. So if you're going to have to start a totally new lab in the department, a new lab space, that carving out your piece of the pie is going to be tough. And so again, getting this exposure, building reputation for you and your department makes it so the university has to, these expectations in their mind of like, oh, they're going to need space. Like they're like that department has like laboratory space intensive work going on, but you have to show them that early
Exactly.
on, so that then when you go ask for something, when you're trying to establish this new lab, it's a bit easier for you to get.
Exactly.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and then this one. So this is a really great one. So should you, this comes back to things, should you be in an entirely different country, environment, whatnot, for your PhD versus postdoc versus early career faculty? This is sort of, this is something that's a bit of a tradition. It definitely has been in Western academia. I'm not sure about overall globally. I know there are some difference, but this idea of like you got to go way away, you got to do like you got to do different things, you got to like, you can't be at the same institution and this type of stuff no matter what the situation is. What are your professional opinions on that, for that sort of chain of events?
For me, it just comes down to productivity. I mean, like okay, who cares if you? For me, I spent bachelor's, master's, PhD all at one institution at Kansas State University, and then I went to CU School of Medicine to do postdoc. So whatever, I spent all 3 degrees at one institution. I understand the fear, if you will, about people that not diversifying their expertise and their experiences by going somewhere else. I feel as if I did that going to School of Medicine after Kansas State University, but I also was trained in 2 departments at K State, between the departments of kinesiology and the College of Veterinary Medicine. So 2 departments, 2 colleges even then. So I kind of got that diversity there. But for me, if I'm looking at somebody, especially if I'm like on a tenure and promotion committee and I'm looking at dossier, I'm just looking at productivity. Obviously, at that point, it's kind of like assessing GPA for somebody that's like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's like trying to get a grant or something. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
that's not what they're looking for. So as long as they're productive, like that's what I would say, like be productive. What is productivity? Publications that you're getting out in high level journals. They don't have to be high impact factor, but just, reputable journals. And, making sure that's consistent, and then, show some grant work, and then all the other stuff, outreach, what we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And this again, these are subjective opinions, but for me, you and I have had colleagues that we've seen be wildly successful, because they didn't let people tell them they needed to go somewhere else. Or they took a great opportunity, without, making these huge jumps that tradition tells you you're supposed to do. Certainly, like you said, there's concern about exposing you. You want to get more exposure. You want to try different things, go into different environments, show that you can adapt in these types of things, and that is important. But you could live your career over 9 times at one university. That's how big these universities are, and the volume of work they're doing, the number of people doing science. So I don't think you should just adhere to this thing of you have to upend your life and like make this huge transition because people tell you to. If you have a good situation and it's, a smaller transition, like you said, productivity, that's where it's at. And don't let someone force you into upending your
Yeah,
career, because
right,
the same people telling you that are the ones that don't care that you have to go through 2 or 3 postdocs before you can find a position. You're the one that's going to be in that situation, not them. And
right.
so that's a pretty, it's a bit opinionated from me, but I would agree with you 100%. I don't think you should, you got to make that choice for yourself, focus on the exposure, but don't follow anybody's arbitrary rules in that regard, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we got to all of them. This one last one we have, asking about a couple of places to look for funding. I will mention too, there's Mendeley has a very good funding database, and also our sponsors, PeerRef. If you go to PeerRef, PeerEF.com, PeerRef has a funding database. Those are a couple good ones to scan through, so you can take a look. No funding database is really complete, and platforms like PeerRef and Mendeley are always looking to try to improve it. But that's a good starting place, and it sort of gives you an idea of all the different agencies and across the globe that are available, all the private funders like Wellcome Trust and whatnot. So other than that, I think we're all set. We went over, of course we did. I'm sorry, Scott. I can never do it, but that was a great discussion. There were so many good points that we wanted to hit on that I just wanted to keep going and make sure that we gave as many possible suggestions and warnings too for people. And again, I appreciate your candor in this. I'm sure our attendees do. A lot of people will not speak about it this candidly, and I think that's what you need from early career faculty. This sort of experiential learning, getting it and hearing it from someone else. Not only is it going to help them make this transition better, but they're going to be encouraged while they're doing it. I think we don't encourage people enough that, you know, they have the goods to make
Yeah.
it work. So I definitely appreciate it. I know the audience appreciates it for sure. So we will probably have Scott again on in the future. This is his second one with us. And if he keeps doing such a good job as a guest, we'll probably continue having him, so you can tune in. Keep in mind that you'll get an email about the next webinar that you can go ahead and register for. It will be available on demand. And as I mentioned at the top of our segment here, you're going to get an email within the next 24 hours. That'll have a link to the on-demand video. So go ahead and just hold off sending us any emails until then. Wait for that one. If you don't get it, go ahead and reach out to us and we'll make sure you get a copy of that. With that, I'm going to let everybody go today. Again, thank you, Dr. Ferguson. Greatly appreciate it.
Mahalo. Yeah.
Look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Later.